Thank you for joining us for our virtual observance of Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. Each year in May, we pay tribute to the generations of Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders who have enriched our nation's history and who continue to be pivotal to our success as we move into the future. Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders encompass a diverse group of cultures, ethnicities, races, and languages. They include all Americans who trace their ancestry back to the Asian continent and many Pacific islands of Melanesia, Micronesia, and Polynesia. The American story as we know it would be impossible without the strength, contribution, and legacies of those who have helped build and unite this country, from laying railroad tracks, tilling fields, starting businesses, and caring for our loved ones and honorably serving our nation in uniform. These communities are deeply rooted in the history of the United States. This year's theme, Advancing Leaders Through Purpose-Driven Service, highlights the advancement of Asian American and Pacific Islander leaders within our military and civilian ranks. Leaders like retired Vice Admiral Raquel C. Bono, the former director of the Defense Health Agency, and retired General Eric Shinseki, 34th Chief of Staff of the Army. Each of these leaders have demonstrated their dedication and service to our military and our nation. Let's not forget Vice President Kamala Harris, the first person of South Asian descent who holds the office of Vice President. Vice President Harris has blazed trails and set examples for young people across the country. These American heroes helped shape our nation as we know it today, and so many more incredible Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders are helping to shape our future. The strength of our nation is our diversity. Diversity of heritage, of culture, religion, and thought is what drives all of us in our nation's innovations and success. To celebrate these diverse cultures, please stay tuned for our guest speakers who will be sharing their perspectives on Asian American and Pacific Islander heritage. Thank you again for watching.
When people ask me why I decided to join the military, I tell them I actually never thought I would when I was growing up. It wasn't until I was applying for medical school that I considered it. I was deciding between going to the University of California, San Diego, or the Uniformed Services University for medical school. And when I got accepted at USU, I was excited to share the news with my family. I totally thought that becoming a doctor was a bigger deal than joining the military. But for my grandparents, it was the exact opposite. They were way more proud of me for joining the military than becoming a doctor. It was because my mom's dad worked at the US Embassy and my dad's dad was a captain for the South Vietnam Army during the Vietnam War. When the war ended, both my grandparents' families were evacuated to the US and were refugees at Camp Pendleton. So they've always felt a great admiration for the US military. It all came full circle when I was doing a medical school rotation at Camp Pendleton. My family and I reflected how incredible it was that they were once refugees at the base I was currently learning to become a doctor. I would like to thank the military for this opportunity and the experiences I've had thus far. Thank you.
Greetings, Brooke Army Medical Center team. It is an honor to share my thoughts in celebration of this month's Asian American Pacific Islander celebration activities. My name is Colonel Thornton Moo, and I am the Associate Dean for Graduate Medical Education at our hospital. My clinical role is that of a neonatologist, where I work in the neonatal intensive care unit on the 5th floor, caring for newborn and premature infants. My background is similar to many other immigrant families, specifically from Asia. My parents immigrated to the United States in the 1950s, shortly after World War II, and the rise of the Communist Party in China. My parents pursued higher educational opportunities, earning college and graduate degrees. I was born and raised in San Francisco, California, a region that is and remains a culturally diverse population. I grew up in a bilingual household speaking both Chinese and English. My friends were white, Hispanic, Chinese, Japanese, Korean, Filipino, and Black. We were less interested in the color of our skin and more inclined to talk about school, homework, sports teams, music, and food. As I grew older, my parents and grandparents shared anecdotal stories about who could live where. That earlier in the 20th century, there were parts of the city that Asians could not live. My grandparents, who lived in the United States and attended college back in the 1920s, went back to China because they were not eligible to become US citizens because federal laws prohibited Asian immigrants from citizenship. I joined ROTC in high school, where one of my teachers was a retired first sergeant and World War II veteran who served with the 442nd Infantry Regiment. Up to that point, I never learned in school about the detainment of Japanese Americans during that period in US history. Nor had I heard about the contributions of Asian Americans who fought valiantly in Europe at a time when their loyalties back home were called to question and their families living in internment camps. Sarge was the first Asian American military service member that I met. He was a crusty infantry NCO who cursed all the time, a chain smoker, but also incredibly educated and even more so loved his students. He shared with me the opportunities that military service offered him and his family. I applied for and received a 4-year ROTC scholarship, which cleared the way to pay for college. After my first year of college, I went to airborne school at Fort Benning, Georgia in 1993, where I was one of 3 Asian Americans in my class. For the first time, my minority status was front and center. From the mispronunciation and teasing about my last name to overt racist name calling. I don't know how much difference it would have made if Sarge had told me about his negative experiences, as I think his generation rarely talked about their problems openly. I share this story because many of us choose not to talk about our negative experiences. Many of us have moved on and learned how to work through those difficulties. I went on to graduate as a top cadet in my ROTC class and entered active duty in the Army Medical Department as a Medical Service Corps officer. I applied for and was accepted to medical school on a health professions scholarship. And during medical school and residency, I was fortunate to learn and work with officers from a variety of ethnic backgrounds to include Asian Americans. As of 2018, Asian American and Pacific Islander service members make up just over 4% and 1% of the total force respectively. Asian Americans comprise over 5% of the active duty officer corps and almost 10% of service members with college degrees. At our military service academies, Asian American Pacific Islanders comprise 5 to 8% of the student body, and at Uniformed Services University, Asian Americans make up about 17% of the current third-year medical student class. Among Brooke Army Medical Center and Wolford Hall resident and fellow physicians, Asian American Pacific Islanders comprise about 9% of the total house staff. So what do all these numbers mean? And more importantly, why does it matter? Most importantly, increased presence of underrepresented minority healthcare providers leads to increased patient satisfaction and communication, as well as improved health outcomes as measured by adherence to medical advice. From General Erickson Sickie, former Army Chief of Staff, Vice Admiral Raquel Bono, former DHA Director and Navy Trauma Surgeon, to Chief Master Sergeant Joanne Bass, the current Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force. The presence of Asian American Pacific Islanders in positions of leadership inspire the next generation of junior service members to imagine a future for themselves within the military. There are many, many more individuals whose names will never make the headlines, but whose contributions and mentorship are no less important. The increased presence of minority service members also serves to educate and inform the larger military about their unique experiences and contributions to their organizations. I am optimistic that the climate within the military continues to improve for AAPI service members, and that we will continue to build upon the contributions and legacy of thousands of other Asian American service members. Thank you.
Thank you for those powerful words. Generations of Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders have helped financially and socially develop and defend the United States, often in the face of immense racial and cultural prejudice. Today, we have roughly 70,000 Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders serving in the United States military. And there are more than 300,000 living Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander American veterans. These Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders add to the immense diversity of the United States military. This diversity is the foundation of our strength. We encourage everyone to learn more about Asian American and Pacific Islander history and contributions. Thank you once again.
One team, one purpose.